The receptionist looked at the man standing quietly in the lobby and politely smiled. "Sir, can I help you?" The man adjusted the faded denim jacket on his shoulders before answering. "I'm here to see Victoria Hayes." The receptionist glanced at his clothes. His boots were dusty. The backpack hanging over one shoulder looked nearly 20 years old. His little daughter held his hand while clutching a worn stuffed bear. She lowered her voice. "Do you have an appointment?" "No. I'm afraid the CEO only meets scheduled guests." He nodded politely. "I understand. I only need 5 minutes. My name is Ethan Brooks. My message is personal." The receptionist hesitated. People dressed like Ethan rarely entered the headquarters of Hayes Technologies. The 40-story glass building represented one of the largest engineering companies in the country. Executives in tailored suits hurried through the lobby carrying expensive briefcases. Nobody paid attention to the quiet father standing beside his daughter. "My name is Ethan Brooks. I was 42 years old. A widowed single father raising my 7-year-old daughter, Lily. For nearly a decade, I had worked repairing farm equipment in a small rural town. My life was simple, peaceful, exactly the way I wanted it. Very few people knew that 22 years earlier, I had helped build Hayes Technologies from nothing more than an empty warehouse and one impossible dream. Back then there were only 2 of us, Robert Hayes and me. Robert had the vision. I had the engineering experience. He handled investors. I built the first working prototypes. We spent countless nights sleeping on concrete floors because we couldn't afford apartments. When our first product finally succeeded, we celebrated by sharing one hamburger because that was all we could afford. Years later, when Robert's daughter Victoria was born, he proudly placed the tiny baby in my arms. "If anything ever happens to me, promise you'll always look after her." I laughed. Nothing's going to happen. Neither of us knew that only 10 years later, a tragic plane accident would take both Robert and his wife. Victoria was only 12. The company board asked me to become CEO. I refused. Grief had broken something inside me. Instead, I quietly sold my ownership shares back to the company, donated most of the money to children's charities, and disappeared. I never told Victoria why. I believed she deserved to grow up without constantly being reminded of the worst day of her life. The only thing I kept was Robert's old leather notebook. Inside were the handwritten sketches of our earliest inventions. Coffee stains covered the pages. Tiny calculations filled every margin. Near the front, Robert had written, "To my brother Ethan, if people ever remember this company, I hope they remember we built it together." After all these years, I finally believed the notebook belonged with his daughter. The receptionist interrupted my thoughts. "I'm sorry, sir. I really can't let anyone upstairs without approval." I smiled. "I understand. Could you simply tell Ms. Hayes that Ethan Brooks is here?" She typed my name into the computer. Nothing appeared. Of course not. Every company record mentioning me had been archived years ago. She picked up the phone. A few minutes later, the executive elevator opened. Victoria Hayes stepped into the lobby surrounded by lawyers, senior executives, and assistants. She was 24. Confident. Professional. She looked so much like her father that for one heartbreaking moment, I forgot how much time had passed. She stopped several feet away. "You asked to see me?" I nodded. "I'm Ethan Brooks. I knew your father." Her polite expression immediately cooled. "My father knew thousands of people. I helped him build this company." Several executives quietly exchanged amused glances. Victoria looked Ethan up and down. His patched jacket, his faded jeans, his worn work boots. Then she smiled politely. "Our company receives many interesting stories. I'm not telling a story. I brought something that belongs to you." I carefully removed the old leather notebook from my backpack. Before I could hand it to her, Victoria raised one hand. "Let me guess. You found something in an attic. And now you want compensation." "No, I don't want anything." She folded her arms. "My father surrounded himself with exceptional engineers. I seriously doubt one of them would arrive looking like." She stopped herself. But the damage had already been done, like someone asking for charity. Little Lily quietly looked up at Victoria. "My daddy helps people. He isn't asking for money." The executive smiled awkwardly. Victoria sighed. "I'm sure he's a wonderful man. But I have shareholders waiting." She turned toward security. "Please escort them out." A tall security officer approached respectfully. "Sir, I'm going to have to ask you to leave." Ethan nodded without arguing. "I understand." As he turned away, The leather notebook slipped from his hands. It landed on the marble floor. The cover opened. Several loose sketches scattered across the lobby. One page slid across the polished floor until it stopped beside an elderly janitor mopping near the elevators. The old man bent down to pick it up. The moment he saw the drawing, his hands began trembling. His mop clattered loudly against the floor. He stared at Ethan. Tears instantly filled his eyes. No, it can't be. Everyone looked toward him. The elderly janitor slowly walked forward holding the yellowed sketch. Then he faced Victoria. His voice shook with emotion. Miss Hayes, I've cleaned this building since the very first day it opened. I watched your father build this company. He carefully lifted the sketch into the air. I remember the night he and Mr. Brooks drew this exact blueprint on the back of a pizza box because they couldn't afford drafting paper. The entire lobby fell silent. Then the old man looked directly at Victoria and quietly added, Your father used to tell every new employee the same sentence. He turned the page over. Written across the back in Robert Hayes' unmistakable handwriting were 7 words that changed everything. None of this exists without Ethan Brooks. The entire lobby stood in stunned silence. Victoria slowly took the yellowed sketch from the elderly janitor. Her hands trembled as she looked at the familiar handwriting. She had seen her father's notes countless times while sorting through family keepsakes after his death. There was no mistaking it. Across the back of the blueprint, written in fading blue ink, were the words, None of this exists without Ethan Brooks. She looked up at the man she had dismissed only moments earlier. For the first time, she really saw him. Not the patched jacket, not the worn boots. She noticed the calm dignity in his face, the quiet confidence of someone who had nothing to prove. The elderly janitor smiled through tears. My name is Walter. I was the night custodian when this company was still one rented warehouse. He pointed toward Ethan. Your father and Mr. Brooks worked until sunrise almost every night. I used to make them coffee because they couldn't afford the vending machine. A few older employees nearby nodded. One whispered, I've heard stories about Ethan Brooks. I thought he was just a company legend. Victoria's voice became almost a whisper. Why didn't anyone tell me? One board member lowered his head. After your father's accident, Mr. Brooks sold his shares and disappeared. The board rarely spoke about those early years. They wanted investors to focus on the company's future. Victoria slowly turned toward Ethan. You really built this company? Ethan smiled gently. We built it together. Your father dreamed bigger than anyone I've ever met. He was also my best friend. Victoria stared at the notebook. Inside were hand-drawn designs, engineering calculations, and photographs of 2 young men smiling in front of a tiny warehouse with a handmade sign that read, Hayes and Brooks Engineering. She looked confused. Our company wasn't called Hayes Technologies. Ethan chuckled softly. No. We changed the name after attracting our first major investor. Victoria turned another page. A photograph slipped out. It showed a little girl sitting on Ethan's shoulders while Robert stood beside them laughing. She looked closer. The child was wearing a tiny birthday crown. Her eyes widened. That's you. You were 3. I don't remember. You wouldn't. You kept trying to steal birthday cake before the candles were blown out. Despite everything, Victoria laughed. For the first time that day, the tension in the lobby eased. Then Ethan handed her the notebook. I promised your father that one day this would belong to you. She carefully accepted it. Why wait 12 years? Ethan looked down for a moment. Because every time I saw you, I saw my best friend's little girl. I wasn't ready. My wife became ill. After she passed away, raising Lily became my whole world. I thought you deserved the chance to lead this company without living under my shadow. Victoria felt tears forming. I judged you because of your clothes. Ethan smiled kindly. You judged a jacket, not a person. We've all done that at some point. She shook her head. No, I humiliated you. In front of your daughter. She walked over to little Lily and knelt beside her. I'm very sorry. Lily hugged her stuffed bear. My daddy said saying sorry is brave. Victoria smiled through tears. He was right. The following morning, Victoria called an emergency board meeting. Every employee watched the company livestream. Standing beside Ethan, she spoke honestly. Yesterday, I made a serious mistake. I measured someone's worth by appearance. I forgot the values my father built this company on. She turned toward Ethan. I also discovered that one of the founders of this company has spent 12 years living quietly without asking for recognition. The room erupted into applause. Victoria then announced several major changes. The original company history would be corrected to recognize Ethan Brooks as co-founder. A scholarship for children of single parents would be established in Ethan and Sarah Brooks' names. Every new employee would receive training emphasizing respect, humility, and integrity alongside technical skills. Then she surprised everyone. "Ethan, I'd like you to return." Ethan smiled. "I appreciate the offer. But my life is different now. I have a little girl who still expects me home for dinner every night." Lily nodded proudly. "And Friday is pizza night." The audience laughed. Victoria smiled. "I understand. Then will you at least agree to become an advisor? Only if I can continue fixing tractors during the week." She blinked. "You're serious? They're honest machines. If something's broken, they tell you." The board laughed again. Months later, Ethan occasionally visited headquarters to mentor young engineers. He never asked for a private office. Instead, he preferred sitting in the employee workshop, helping interns solve problems with simple sketches on scrap paper. One afternoon, Victoria asked him, "What's the biggest lesson my father ever taught you?" Ethan looked around the bustling engineering floor before answering. "He always said, build things that make people's lives better. If success comes, stay humble enough to remember who handed you the first hammer." Years later, visitors entering the headquarters noticed something new in the lobby. Beside the company's timeline stood a bronze sculpture of two young men shaking hands in front of a small workbench. Below it was a simple inscription: Robert Hayes and Ethan Brooks. Friends, founders, brothers by choice. Underneath, another line had been added at Victoria's request. Never judge a person's value by the clothes they wear. Character always outlasts appearances. Whenever school groups toured the building, guides always stopped at that display. They told children how one of the founders had once returned wearing patched clothes, been mistaken for a beggar, and quietly responded with kindness instead of pride. For Victoria, the lesson never faded. She often looked at the old leather notebook resting safely in a glass case in her office. It reminded her that companies can be built with money and ideas. But lasting legacies are built with humility, loyalty, and the courage to honor the people who helped lay the first brick, even if time has almost forgotten their names.